morning, everybody. It's great to see everybody this morning, hopefully with your coffee mugs. I'm Dipti Chaporia, President of the American College of Cardiology, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to our virtual coffee table. You know, we come together every month to talk about great ideas, innovation, hot topics, and more with really fascinating guests in the world of cardiology, medicine, healthcare, and beyond. So we look forward to an interactive session again today and have a lot of the last, maybe not the half, but last at least 15 minutes for a discussion for open Q&A from all of the attendees. So we invite you to follow along with us on Twitter using the hashtag ACC Coffee Table. And a reminder for virtual engagement, please remain muted when you're not speaking, and we encourage the use of WebEx chat feature. And at the end, we hope that you'll join us for the question period. And if I call on you, please have your camera ready so we can see you and when we chat with you. And if you're viewing this live today from the WebEx application, click the layout button in the right upper corner, and under the stage view, select stack for optimal experience. So without any further ado, I'm today joined by two exceptional cardiology leaders, two icons, as I would like to say, Dr. Nanette Wenger and Dr. Clyde Yancey. And we're going to talk about their improbable journey into leadership and their insights and they have for their esteemed careers in medicine, and what can we all learn from that. So let me introduce Dr. Wenger first. Dr. Nanette Wenger is Professor of Medicine in the Division of Cardiology at Emory University School of Medicine, Chief of Cardiology at Grady Memorial Hospital, and a consultant to the Emory Heart and Vascular Center. And I recently learned that she started there actually in 1958, and we'll get that clarification soon. Coronary artery disease in women has been one of Dr. Wenger's major clinical and research interests. And she's really built a distinguished career as an academic non-interventional cardiologist and has really led the paradigm shift on cardiac rehab and coronary atherosclerotic heart disease in women. She's chaired the U.S. National Heart and Lung and Blood Institute's Conference on Cardiovascular Health and Disease in Women, as well as chaired the World Heart Health Organization Expert Committee on Rehabilitation after cardiovascular disease, as well as co-chaired the guideline panel on cardiac rehab for the U.S. Agency for Healthcare Policy and Research. She has a long-standing interest in geriatric cardiology and is the past president of the Society of Geriatric Cardiology and editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Geriatric Cardiology. Dr. Wenger has received countless awards over the years, highlighting the many achievements in science, medicine, mentoring, teaching, and leadership. And in recognition of her leadership and accomplishment in the field of cardiovascular disease in women, she received the ACC's inaugural Bernadine Healy Leadership Award in cardiovascular disease in 2015. And if that wasn't enough, Dr. Wenger has also authored and co-authored over 1,300 scientific and review articles and book chapters. So very honored to have Dr. Wenger to the ACC coffee table. Welcome, Nanette.
Delighted to be with you this morning.
Great. Our second guest today is Dr. Clyde Yancey. Dr. Yancey is the Vice Dean of Diversity and Inclusion at the Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. He concomitantly serves as the Chief of Cardiology at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine and Associate Director of the Bloom Cardiovascular Institute at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. He holds the Magistrat Endowed Professor of Medicine chair and also holds an appointment as Professor of Medicine of Medical Social Sciences. His research interests are heart failure, clinical guideline generation, outcome sciences, personalized medicine, and healthcare disparities. He's extensively published with well over 600 peer-reviewed publications. Dr. Yancey is Deputy Editor of JAMA Cardiology, Senior Section Editor for heart failure, also the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, JACC, and he's the Master of the American College of Cardiology, and Master of the American College of Physicians, a Fellow of the American Heart Association, a Fellow of the Heart Failure Society of America, and an Honorary Fellow of the American Society of Preventive Cardiology. He's the former chair of ACC-AHA Heart Failure Guideline Writing Committee and an immediate past co-chair of the ACC Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. Dr. Yancey is a former president of the American Heart Association and an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine and the American Association of Physicians. And we're thrilled to have Dr. Yancey here also with us. Welcome, Dr. Yancey, and welcome, Dr. Wenger.
Thank you, Dick.
So let's get started. As I said, this is a discussion about sort of your improbable leadership turn. I mean, when you think about medicine and in cardiology, for a long time, the people that were sort of out there in leadership positions, when I was a medical student, they said it was a white men with white hair and white coats. But here we have a woman, who's become an icon in cardiology, and we have an African-American male. And both of you are just recognizable figures in cardiology, have done this incredible contribution to our field. So I really want to hear the journey that you both have been on. I'll start with Dr. Wenger. Dr. Wenger, is it true that you started in 1958 in Emory? And you shared a wonderful story when I was with you recently about how you started off and how they sort of brought you to the principal's office when you sort of started to ruffle some feathers. So we'd love to hear your story.
Well, again, I was a Northerner coming to the South, coming to a very segregated South where I had never lived before. And, we all have our core values. I came in as chief of the cardiac clinic. And at that time in the segregated South, as we called patients in, the white patients were called Mr. or Mrs., and the black patients were called by their first name. And of course, this was totally unacceptable, and I changed that immediately. And as you might anticipate, I ended up very often in the office of the director of the hospital, who said, Dr. Wenger, do you know what you've done? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, do you know it's illegal? And I said, yes, sir. And he said, are you going to do it again? And I said, yes, sir. And he didn't do anything, and it continued my way. And I think that this is just very important. But there were other things also in the South. Remember, I was working in a public hospital, and the attribution of individuals who were poor was that they were not intelligent, so that when they went to the pharmacy, they got their prescription by number. So there was no name on it. So you would get your digitalis as a number 6, your aspirin as a number 5. And I said, this was not acceptable. It finally changed. But what I did was I probably inadvertently started the first patient education program in the country, because we mimeographed cards that said number 1 is digoxin. This is your heart medicine. Number 2 is Coumadin. This is your blood thinner. And we did things that were in our patient's best interest. And that, to me, has always been the goal of what I have tried to do.
Did you ever think that you would be where you are now all these years later when you first started?
Well, during the first decade or even 2 decades of my academic career, when I walked into a faculty meeting or to a meeting of a committee of the AHA or the ACC, I didn't see anyone that looked like me. And therefore, I thought that it was extremely important that I would not only do well, but do superiorly, so that there would be the next woman and the next and the next. And one of the things we talked about before this conference is what kind of advice would I give? And actually, it's the same advice I give to men and to women. What is it that I found stood me in good stead, and what do I recommend to my trainees, actually, and junior colleagues, that they do to build their reputation and leadership? And if you give me a minute or two, there are about a dozen things that I'd like to share with everyone.
Absolutely.
Remember that the patients are at the center of everything we do, whether it is research, whether it is teaching, whether it is training, etc. So that the patient encounter is the most important thing in building your reputation and your leadership. And when you see the patient, that patient must have your undivided attention and respect. You must be empathetic and non-judgmental. And then what I have seen now is Atlanta has increasingly become an international city. You have to develop cultural competence. Then I'll give you a list of other things. You have to build relationships and collaborate. Medicine is a team sport. But within that, you have to have self-awareness, realizing that all of us have some unconscious bias. You have to establish trust, and that takes perseverance. And the important thing is honesty and integrity. We have, over the years, tried to build diversity and inclusiveness. We have to be a good speaker and a communicator. This is the way you inspire people to follow what you think is important. Don't just present problems, but solve them. And in solving them, you articulate your values. Be a good competitor, but fight fair and maintain your dignity within this. And then encourage and empower others. This is what we do as mentors and sponsors. Importantly, show appreciation because everyone around you is trying as well. Establish excellence, and this is the high standard. And then relative to some of what we're talking about this morning, participate in professional societies. This is the way you give back to your professional community. You have to be a visionary. You have to inspire vision in others, and you have to, within these professional societies, articulate your aspirations. And finally, develop a work-life synergy. Value your family, value your community, enjoy the people around you, but most important, value yourself. And I think this is the advice that I would give to my juniors, to my colleagues, and that I continue to give to myself.
Wow, that's a fantastic list of things. Wow, there's so much on all of that. I want to ask you, what about challenges? What are some of the challenges that you faced?
Well, again, the challenges are originally when I became interested in heart disease in women, my chief, my mentor, and my good friend, Dr. J. Willis Hurst, said, why are you embarking on this tangent? You have a reputation as a clinical cardiologist, as a clinical trialist. Why are you wasting your time on the tangent? And when I told him that I thought it was important, as he always did, he said, I think you're making a mistake, but I will support you. And I must admit that a few years later, he came back and said, Nanette, I am so glad that you didn't listen to me because this has become such an important part of American cardiology.
Did you ever come across a challenge that you were not able to scale? And is there a lesson we can learn from that?
Well, again, I expect I was involved with so many things that when one door closed, another one opened. And then there were times that I came back to that original door. So I certainly had some major areas of focus, but there were so many things that interested me that if I saw that something at the time was not feasible, I just addressed another one.
That was fantastic. I mean, you just gave us so many pearls in just such a short period of time. I'm going to ask Dr. Yancey to share a little bit about his journey. And I know that you grew up in the South also, and I think you were born in Baton Rouge. Is that right? And so, tell us a little bit about your journey and some of the things that you want to share with us.
I'm more than happy to do that, Deputy. So let me start by saying good morning to you, and thank you for this lovely invitation. And let me say good morning to my amazing friend and still mentor on many occasions, Dr. Nanette Winger. And Deputy, if we can just pause for a minute after saying good morning to everyone that's listening, and just drop the mic. I mean, did you hear Nanette? That's
Oh, yeah.
all anyone needs to hear on a Saturday morning. to rejuvenate your career, to reorient, to catalyze, to have enough leverage to move forward. Even I took notes. I mean, that was absolutely extraordinary. And I'm not saying that in some sort of gratuitous way because I'm very honest and I do admire her leadership and her mentorship. But let me just point out three things that Dr. Winger said that I think merit profound emphasis. Of all the things she shared with us, she said, take the high standard. Think about this. Take the high standard. Don't just do performative things. Don't just meet a bar. Take the high standard. Imagine what happens if all of us adopt that approach and take the high standard. And then think about this important phrase, which I think is a perfect representation of something that is uniquely frustrating, this work-life balance issue. Let's face it, it's not quantitative. And I think the way that Nanette phrases it is work-life synergy. That really is a takeaway. Everyone should walk away saying, think about what Dr. Nanette said. Value yourself, value your family, have principles that matter to you in your life, value your work, but make them all synergistic. That is so much more relevant than having this artificial concept of a balance being with work on one side and life on the other side. That actually juxtaposes two areas that should not be competitive. They should, in fact, be interdigitated, intertwined. So I think those are two things that are incredible. And here's the third thing, and I saved this for number three. Think of the courage it took for a woman, teen 50s, early 60s, in the deepest of the deep South, where hatred was prevalent in society, and for her to stand square with an employer and say, yes, I did that. Yes, by the law, it was wrong. And yes, I'll do that again. Courage, one of the most important attributes of leadership. Dippy, we do this because we're trying to share with the listeners what are the traits of leadership that are so important. These first few minutes have been profound. It's persistence, it's commitment, it's courage. Those things are takeaways that we cannot ignore. And then adopting that high standard and recognizing that the important goal is work-life synergy. So I am totally emboldened for my friend Annette. But on to my story. Deputy, I have no reason being here. I really have no reason being here. I am the grandchild of sharecroppers. I'm the great-grandchild of children of slaves. That's my pause moment. All generations of my family, including me, were poor. When I went to medical school at a very early age, at the end of the first week, I was walking to the Office of Admissions to get a 1-year reprieve on my admission because I had no money to pay for my tuition. And on the way to the Office of Admissions, it was a Friday afternoon, I checked my mailbox at Tulane, K30. I will never forget that because it was such a pivotal moment in my life. I opened my mailbox and there was a full scholarship and an envelope waiting for me. I still get a little twinge
Wow.
when I think about that because I was steps away from yielding my position at Tulane and trying to find some way to get enough money to get back in school to start medical school. And there it was, steps away from knocking on the door to resign. The scholarship was waiting for me. So from that point forward, we've continued to really essentially ignore what others have said. When I was a young boy, people laughed when I said I wanted to be a doctor. Despite my academic performance, they laughed. When I went to college, a historically Black college, by the way, I was advised that's just too impossible. There's no way that you'll be able to go to medical school. He said, where would you like to go? I said, my dream is to go to Tulane. If you grew up in Louisiana, Tulane was the Harvard of the South.
Of course.
And they literally laughed and said, there's no way a little Black boy is going to go to Tulane. It's not going to happen. And I just kept ignoring. And it happened. I got admitted to Tulane when I was 19. I really hustled through college very quickly and started medical school at 20. And what a ride. What an incredible ride. So lots of permutations on that story, but I'm not supposed to be here.
But what continued to make you push and continue? Because you were against a lot of odds that were against you. But what was that? What was that inside? Was it just that you wanted it so badly? What was the thing?
So I think probably three things. Yes, I wanted it more than I wanted anything else. It's just that simple. I had been taught by my mother that being good must always be better than. Being good enough isn't. You must always be better than. So everything I did, my goal was not only to be better than, but to be the best. That's probably had some benefits, but also some vulnerabilities. But besides my drive, which I would put as number three, I would say the other things that were really important was this sense of purpose that was instilled in me by those that did support me, the spirit of altruism that I developed very early on. I'm the product of a very traditional Black Baptist church background. And there are a lot of people that tap me on the shoulder and say, you do some good things in life. And I never stopped hearing those echoes. But the most important influence, and you only need one person in your life like this, but it was a mother who believed in me with every fiber of her body. That's, even though she's been gone for decades, I always rejuvenate when I reflect on the power of a mother's love who did not waver, who did not let me waver. And when it was the most stressful moment in life, she was there to keep me grounded, to keep focused. And as she would say, shoulders square, head up.
So we have, 54,000 members in the American College of Cardiology. And there's, some people listening today that are with us, some that will listen to this, and they're going to say, how do I get up to the heights of leadership? If you had to give them one piece of advice, what is that one piece of advice that you would give them?
One piece of advice that I think is incredibly pertinent is competence. No one gets to be a leader if you're skilled, if you're proficient at what you're doing. And if you can take competence to the next level, just by virtue of being able to execute well, you at least are in the discussion for leadership. But let's make no mistake about this. What gets you into the room as a potential leader is not what makes you a good leader. What gets you in the room, David, what gets Nanette in the room, what gets me, is that we are at least adequate, if not good cardiologists. But there has to be some other trait that allows you to lead and to lead successfully. And what we have to appreciate is that leadership is not some innate gift. It is, yes, a series of lived experiences, but there is a curriculum of leadership. And if you are intent to become a leader, just like you want to become a physiologist or an interventional cardiologist or interpret echocardiograms, there is a curriculum. Take it seriously and study the curriculum of leadership. But everything starts with competence. Your teams have to respect you. You have to show that you are facile with the discipline. Otherwise, there's no way that your word will carry any substance. So if there's one piece of advice, and that's kind of a difficult question, but I should be able to answer the difficult questions, I would say the first step, you've got to become. But there are a lot of things that go beyond that. I really embrace one of Nanette's statements. Gratitude is very important. No leader is successful if you're self-centered. You need to be selfless. You need to say a lot of thank yous. Do a lot of listening, being able to be altruistic and be humble. We're talking about the things that I believe make great leaders. You're competent, you're confident, that you listen a lot, you say thank you a lot, and from my perspective, you lead.
So Nanette, I'm going to ask you, was there a time when you felt like, wow, this is really hard, what I'm trying to do is really hard, I don't know if I can do this, or do you think that, what were some of those moments where you sort of questioned yourself or the journey that you were on?
Well, the area of leadership is always hard. No one gives you anything that you don't deserve. So as Clyde just said very eloquently, you have to work to deserve it. And essentially, you have to enroll people in your vision, enroll them in your vision that it is important, and then it will happen. And as a matter of fact, Dipti, I think this coffee with the president is part of your vision. And I think it's going to be a mark of your presidency, because what it says is that it is so important for us to talk with each other, to have conversations, to have questions, to have answers, and to meet over a cup of coffee on a Saturday morning. I think this is a very different approach. It is your unique response to a pandemic, and I congratulate you for it.
Oh, thank you so much, Nanette. Was there a time when you just felt that, how did you know you were on the right track? I mean, we all ask that, right? When we're sort of leading our way, doing the things that we do, sometimes we question ourselves. How did you personally know you were on the right track? How did you overcome some of your own questioning? I mean, I get asked as a woman, what about the imposter syndrome? That type of thing.
Well, I think the imposter syndrome hadn't really been invented when I started out. So I never had that to challenge me. Some of the things that have come along have given us negative thoughts rather than positive thoughts. And I think both for women and for men, if you value yourself, if you work as hard as you can to be competent, to be caring, to work with others, to really be a good citizen of your world, then that is the fundamental of leadership skills.
So you've been doing this for a long time. Are you happy with the way the field has gone, the way that we're embracing diversity, the way that we're, where we have come, just to see where the profession has come? Any comments about that?
Well, Dipti, I call this steps on a journey. And we've started the journey. We have enrolled other people on the journey. And, heart health is not solely a medical problem. And perhaps what we've done in this addressing of inclusiveness and diversity is to realize that if we want the best heart health for our patients, that we have to address areas of social determinants of health, of economics, of pollution. We have to be citizens of our local community. We have to address public policy so that the inclusiveness is really more spheres. We have to get legal involvement. The economics of this are extremely important. And that is what I see as the excitement as well of the inclusiveness.
I agree. And Clyde, I'm going to bring you into this because I think the pandemic really highlighted the issues of, health disparities. And I know that health equity is an issue that you have spoken a lot about. We launched at the college the ACC Health Equity Task Force. We're well underway with having a strategic plan that we're going to hopefully interdigitate in our next strategic plan. But talk to me about sort of that vantage point. This has been around for a long time. You have seen the evolution in cardiology. Tell me your thoughts. Are you happy with where we're going? What are some of the big things that you've seen, or what are things that still frustrate you? It's a big open-ended question.
So what I'll tell you is that I am emboldened, second time I've used that word, because I've recognized that it's no longer just about health and healthcare. This is a generational movement. This has been a journey. I love and that's phrase steps on a journey. But these have been some major steps over the last 24 months. But the journey didn't just start 24 months ago. The journey's been ongoing for centuries, actually. I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about the history of medicine and how some of the differences occurred, perpetuated in our culture. What emboldens me is that at this point in time, at this point in time, I think we can generation emerging says we actually take our oath of poverty seriously. It does not allow us to make value judgments about people. It does not allow us to operate on our biases. It insists that we practice medicine with the highest integrity, provide the best care to all. That's who we are as American College of Cardiology, by the way. Licensed. We are enabled. We are directed by the best cardiovascular care to all persons. And as our population continues to change in its demographic, the only way we can execute the incredible missions of American College of Cardiology is to really embrace all persons who not only come to us for care, but who come to us as candidates to enter our profession. So that as we diversify our profession, and this is diversity with a big D, not just race and ethnicity, geography, sex, gender, the entire portfolio of this beautiful kaleidoscope that makes us the people, the collective people we as ACC continues to take a leading position, recognizes the importance of diversifying people, and then in companionship understands the importance of caring for an increasingly diverse population, then we are part of that generational change that says it is our duty. Let me say that word again. It is our duty to provide the best care for all persons, regardless of circumstances.
So I had a coffee with Michelle Albert and Ed Childs. Ed Childs is one of our incoming board of trustees member. He's from the Morehouse School of College. He's a general surgeon, really interested in health disparities. And we talked about what can say our listeners do when it comes to these are big issues, the social determinants of health. They should teach us that 20% of it is the health delivery, but actually 80% of a person's health is about all of those other factors. And it almost feels like, how do we scale that as an individual? So I hear what you're saying. I hear what Nanette is saying. But how does we have a lot of people listening. They're busy with their RVUs, they're busy with their families, they're busy with all of these things. How do they get that in? How do they, they think they're really being great doctors, but maybe they're not addressing those things. What's the best way?
Best opportunity we have is at the individual level. Let me have you reflect on something a few minutes ago. Imagine how those older Black men and women felt when Nanette insisted that no, that's Mr. Jones, that's Mrs. Smith. Imagine how those people felt when someone addressed them correctly, brought them into an exam room and said, "Good morning, Mr. Smith, how may I help you?" That's action at the individual level. But for contemporary practitioners, professionals, let me give you a couple of easy things you can think about. The first thing you can do is take just a few moments to sit still, listen to the voices you haven't heard. When we bring someone in a room that's different from us, even I have to do this, sit and listen and give them the benefit of your absolute undivided attention and understand what are the life and living circumstances for that person, that professional, that patient. That's always incredibly important. The next thing we need to think about is when we make our decisions that impact the health of humanity, always do a reflection on what I mean by that. Look at the plan. Today's world is on a computer screen. Say, is this the best care? Are these the right decisions? Have we enabled this patient? Have we prepared this patient vis-a-vis patient education? So listen, challenge your own plan to make sure that that's reasonable. and then invest yourself. So I've said, listen, reflect, and then invest. And what does invest yourself mean? Over the last 40 minutes now, you've heard words like mentor, you've heard words like sponsor, and yet another word, ally, allyship. If you have the opportunity to bring a young student, raw, unrefined, into your space, and you say, let me just show you what I do, and let them get that little ignition of it, that's really interesting. You have no idea how that may influence another person. So at the ground level, each of us as individuals, let's think about pausing, listening more. Let's think about reflecting. Have we made the decisions that we think are most pertinent? That would be very helpful. And then have we invested just a little bit of ourselves? It's amazing how little you need to do to make a difference in something today. So pause, reflect, listen, and invest.
No, those are really great points. And I love the idea of Nanette, you doing what you did about having them address them as Mr. and Mrs. And it makes me sort of pause and think, wow, all you have to do is little things that can make a big difference. And maybe the social determinants of health seem like they're huge, but maybe scaling even a small piece of it will be very helpful. Nanette, your reflections.
Yeah, well, Dipta, we talked about participating in professional societies, and all the people listening are ACC members. But the question is, are you an active member? Are you a contributor? What is it that you do to enable your society to do the things it does on the national space and so forth? Because as an active member in any of the committees, in any of the councils, in any of the task forces, you are contributing to care. So that's the first part, is that don't just join, but become involved and work. But I do want to emphasize community, because just as we are citizens of our academic area, of our hospital, of our medical school, we're also citizens of our community. And the social determinants of health in our community are very much influenced by decisions that are being made in the political arena. So that you have to become involved. You have to become involved to have your voice heard by the people who make decisions. And we do things, for example, fortunately, Grady Hospital is just a stone's throw away from the state capitol, so that we are down there very often to speak with our legislators, to testify, to make comments, and even on the local area within our neighborhoods. You start doing things within the neighborhood that spread to the city, that spread to the state. We have to become involved in the decision-making. We have to become involved in the legislation. And we have to become involved in voting, because this is the way we express our values and our mission.
You mentioned mentoring. Both of you have mentioned mentoring and sponsorship. And tell me about that. I mean, you've mentored, now is a generation of cardiologists. Talk to us about the importance of that and what has that meant, and how do you think about that relationship?
Well, first place, I think what you have to remember is that the first mentor indeed was a woman, and it was the goddess Athena who came down to mentor Telemachus. And what she did is, because of the cultural aspects of the time, she came down in the form of a man called mentor. But this indeed was a woman who was the first mentor. And that means that all of us can be mentors to a variety of people. We can be mentors to our peers. We can be mentors to our trainees. We can be mentors to the young people to tell them what an exciting field health and health policy and medicine are. And mentorship is a two-way street. Being a mentor is not telling what people what to do. It is listening to what they want to do, answering some of their questions about the best avenues, getting them involved in a village of mentors who will address many of their important issues. And then, of course, you do have the responsibility of sponsoring people, because we always have the opportunity to fill a place on a task force, on a committee, on a working group. And we should think to the people who we are mentoring to say, does this position that is open, is this going to help them achieve what their goals are? And then to work very hard to see that they are included in that involvement. But you know, early on, I had no women mentors, and that was the one thing that was missing in my mentoring. I had phenomenal academic mentors, both at the Harvard Medical School and at the Mount Sinai, and when I came to Emory. But only recently, last decade or so, have I had peer mentors, women, who have taught me so much, because each of us comes to this with an individual experience. And my mentors have been not only in the field of medicine, but they've been in the field of business and law and in the community and in community service. So being mentored continues for many, many years into your career.
I love that. I love the idea of, it's hard to think that you need mentoring, but yes, Nanette, I love that point about mentoring is a lifelong thing, plus the fact that it doesn't have to necessarily be even a physician. I've said a lot of times that it can be a patient too. I've had several patients that have been my mentors. They've taught me a lot. So Clyde, I want to go to, I know you're a fantastic mentor. One of my colleagues said that when he interviewed for medical school, you said after his interview, you said to him, let me tell you, can I tell you what you did well and what you didn't do well? And he said that it was an incredibly valuable experience. And he, to this day, remembers that. You may not remember him, but he remembers what Dr. Yancey did for him. So tell me your thoughts about mentorship and who your mentors have been and what you think about mentoring.
So great conversation, and boy, so much substance in Nanette's words yet again. The first quality that someone has to embrace as a mentor is being selfless. You have to be willing to enjoy another person's shine, another person's rise. If you're still self-centered, it's really hard to be a genuine mentor. Let me extend Nanette's comments about mentoring into yet another position. The mentor is a person that has exact expertise that you want to emulate, and you're learning from that person. So you're looking for someone who's doing something the way you'd like to do it one day. Maybe it's scientific writing, maybe it's the research, maybe it's the clinical practice. The sponsor is different. The sponsor is that person that has power, that has the ability to create an opportunity, just as Nanette suggested, to step aside and invite you to have membership on a leadership panel or on a writing committee. That's sponsorship. And what's allyship? When you use your privilege, and we all have privilege in one or another domain, and you lend that privilege to someone that doesn't have privilege to enable their progress, that's not a gift. That's actually an opportunity. Do that, things are different. But there's one more dimension. What about coaching? A coach doesn't necessarily have to be as facile with your area of focus, your area of study as a mentor, but a coach needs to understand career progression and help you anticipate what are the right next steps for you. So there are four elements here. There is mentoring, yes. There is sponsorship, absolutely. But then there's also allyship, particularly in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then there's coaching. And there's a defined discipline of executive coaching within schools of business that really informs the right way in which you can identify a skill set, help someone position themselves for success. I'll wrap this up by saying, with regards to my own mentors, this is a lesson learned. I was a cardiology fellow in the 80s. This was at the height of apartheid in South Africa. One of my first and most significant mentors was a physician who was a part of the South African exodus of professionals as apartheid was becoming more challenging and was beginning to deteriorate. Here I am, young black man from the deep South with just a little trace of militancy still embedded in my DNA. And here's a white man escaping from this regime of apartheid. And we could not have had a better relationship. And so you never exactly know from whom you receive mentoring. But my lifelong mentoring came from Jim Morrison, who just put me on his wing as an intern, stayed with me all the way through my decision to move to Northwestern as chief of cardiology. Up to his death, I was still close with him. And then the first peer mentor I had was Elijah Saunders. He's no longer with us, but a hypertension expert, one of the founders of the Association of Black Cardiologists. Elijah was a visiting professor at UT Southwestern. I was a second year resident, and I could not stop raising questions. I mean, I literally was hanging onto his coat and raising questions. And from that moment forward, he started calling me professor. And so every time I would see him, he would address me as professor. And he would check and say, how are things going, professor? What are you up to? What are you doing next? And I always valued that opportunity to connect with someone who would blaze a path that I could follow. Final thing I'll say is that we've been talking about success all morning. No one becomes successful by themselves. No one. There's always someone to thank. There's always someone to thank. We are always standing on the shoulders of those before us. And you are here, I am as well.
Yeah, and Nanette, as I was thinking about this coffee, I read that when you graduated from Harvard Medical School, you were one of the first women to graduate medical school from Harvard Medical School. Is that true?
Well, mine was the sixth class of women at Harvard. Harvard was fairly late to admit women. And in their ultimate wisdom, the Board of Overseers decided we were going to be there for 10 years on probation, so that it was only when my class graduated that women were incorporated in the university charter.
Wow.
Now, what that meant was that we could not get university housing. We were interlopers. So the men lived in the dormitories under house rules, and we lived in apartments in town. But the fact is that the first 10 years of women did very well. And as I look at my classmates and the few before me, and there were 10 women in each class, all of them have done well in so many areas and have contributed very importantly to the Harvard Medical School that at one time only had them on probation.
Wow. So there is one of our members, Ashok Krishnaswamy. He is a cardiologist that actually took a year off and is at Stanford doing a geriatric fellowship because he's very interested in geriatrics. And he really wanted me to ask this question because he's driving and he's not able to ask it. He wanted to ask both of you, what are your thoughts on specifically aging specific priorities and health disparities, sort of improving the care of older say African-American women and men and women. And his feeling is that the older you get, the older individuals often get lost. So thoughts about aging specific priorities. Nanette, I'll go with you first then.
Yes, it's been my privilege to work with Ashok over the years in the Geriatric Council of ACC. And if we think of the patients that we see in our office, in our intensive care units and in our laboratories, they are increasingly geriatric patients. So that cardiology is almost becoming geriatric cardiology. The better we do about prevention, the more we defer illness to later in life, the more we're going to see the geriatric patients. Now, just as the pediatric patients are not just little adults, the geriatric patients have specific areas where we have to develop competence. We have to learn about the geriatric syndromes. We have to learn here when we talk about patient preferences and patient desired outcomes. This, I would hope, would become part of our electronic medical record. What is it that the patient desires of their health care? And as we've looked at this, these are not the outcomes that are typically measured in the randomized clinical trials. Randomized trials look at mortality, they look at hard data. For the older patient with disease, they want independence, they want fewer hospitalizations, they want mobility, they want to be able to continue in as active a lifestyle as they can. So first, what we have to do is to see that the endpoints that are valued by geriatric patients are included as endpoints in our randomized clinical trials, so we know that when we recommend something to a patient. Then we have to see that the older patients are indeed included in reasonable numbers in the randomized clinical trials. But most important, we have to learn to listen, to say what is it that the older adult wants from the care we are being asked to deliver, because that will help decisions that will involve testing, that will involve preventive interventions, that will involve medications, that will involve surgical interventions. And we have to begin to learn specifically about the geriatric syndromes. The people who did the TAVR learned immediately and taught back to cardiology the importance of frailty. And they assess frailty because that's one of the major determinants. Now, what we've not yet done is to say, in the patients who are pre-procedure, is there any way we can improve the frailty to improve the outcome? So this is a wide spectrum of interest, research, translational work, et cetera, that must be done to enable us to deliver quality care to older adults.
Clyde, you have thoughts?
Everything that Ned just said entered into the lexicon of cardiology. It's just that important. Let me give you just a few additional thoughts. There is a phenomenon of ageism. We need to be careful that we are bringing health equity into that conversation as well. The second thought, we need to be very careful that we pierce the veil of diseases of becoming older and understand that some of that necessarily is associated with financial toxicity. Limited resources, limited income, increasing healthcare and housing expenses. We should be super sensitive about challenges that many older persons are not willing to speak up and own. And so that's very important. But here's the one thing I'll leave you with, Dipti. Think about every condition that you see in a cath lab, that I see in a heart failure clinic, that Annette and I study in clinical trials. They're all conditions of aging. Here's my point. We should begin to think about the biology of aging. There is a science here. Aging is obligatory for obvious reasons. But the pace of aging, the consequences of aging, those are biological phenomena. Imagine what happens if we begin to understand the biology of aging. The goal here should be to extend the health span, as my good friend Don Lloyd Jones talks about, and compress morbidity into the very last stages of life, but provide as much quality of life as possible. As we understand the biology of aging, and there's this whole new field of therapeutics known as senolytics, there may be an opportunity to at least modulate this. But guess what, Dipti? Lifestyle always matters. Everything we know right now, if you have an appropriate diet, if you're physically active, if your mind is engaged, you slow that clock. So I would only endorse what Annette just taught us, but I would extend those conversations and think about the biology of aging, make us aware of the concern of ageism, and to be sensitive to the underlying driver, which many times is financial.
Wow. There's so much in this coffee that I think I'm going to have to go back and listen to. But you know, both of you really are icons in cardiology. Both of you have forged a path forward. Nanette, as a woman, early on, you becoming the first chief resident at Mount Sinai in cardiology, and just really all that you both have taught us. You, Clyde, being the African American that almost dropped out of medical school because of not having any money, but then getting the scholarship. How do you want to be remembered, Clyde? How do you want to be remembered?
I'm not ready to be remembered just yet. So,
Well, I mean, what's one of the legacies you'd like to leave?
I think that the contribution that I hope that I and many, many others are making to our field is this sense of being more civil, having more compassion, being more welcoming to all. I think that if I can respect something I was taught as a young Boy Scout, always leave a campsite better than you found. And if the campsite of cardiovascular medicine is more accommodating, just, inclusive, then I think this journey will have made a lot of sense.
Nanette.
Well, you know, Dipti, I had the privilege of being the first in many, the first chief resident, the first woman president of Georgia ACC, the first woman governor for Georgia, the first Heart Association president in Georgia. But I think my legacy is that I was not the last. And what I have been able to do is to open the door for so many women to follow and to continue to broaden this aspect of leadership. So I would like to be remembered as one who cares about my patients, who cares about my colleagues, who really cares about my community, and who does as much as possible to contribute to the success of all of them.
Wow. How can you beat that? What a wonderful way. This has been really wonderful. I know that there was somebody in the audience who asked, how can junior trainees who have a goal of one day serving on the ACC Board of Trustees begin to express their interest and work towards achieving their goal? I think that you can apply for committees, you can get involved, but I want to see what Nanette and Clyde have to say about getting involved. How does a young person get to where you are? How do they work towards it? You mentioned a lot of things. One thing that you can tell this trainee, the junior trainee.
Well, again, this is where the mentoring helps, because the mentors can help you define where there are working groups that need your help. You succeed in a working group, you get onto a committee, and then it progresses. But you have difficulty making the first step without a little bit of assistance. And this is where the mentoring helps. And this is why your mentors should encompass a wide variety of interests, all of the interests that you have, so that you can explore each one of them and decide which is going to be your initial and your subsequent pathway.
Clyde?
I'll just add one very short comment. I'm sensitive about our time. I would tell a young trainee to do just one thing: move to the front of the room. So many people are in the back of the room, the rear, the head is leaning, the phone is out. No, move to the front of the room. If you start by being engaged, others will engage you. Move to the front of the room.
Yeah. And I'm going to close by saying that, you know, courage, right? You guys both talked about courage. And I know when I started as president, somebody said to me, you know, she said, can I give you a piece of advice? I said, sure. She said, be bold. If not now, when? And I think that's something to remember your entirety of your life. Be bold. If not now, when? We don't get this path more than one time. So I want to thank both of you. I want to thank my guests, Dr. Wenger and Dr. Yancey, for joining us for the virtual ACC coffee table today. You know, these recordings of these sessions are going to be on the ACC YouTube page, typically a few days after the event. Next month, we're going to gather on Saturday, March 26th Again, at the same time, we're going to be talking to Professor Fausto Pinto and Professor Stefan Achenbach and talk about global togetherness. And for many of you that have joined me before, you know that I always like to end with a toast. So pick up your coffee mug, and here we go. May your coffee be strong and your day be full. May we help. May we heal. May we advance heart care worldwide together. Thank you all for stopping by. Thank you to my guests. Thank you to all of you. It's been a pleasure. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you and goodbye.
All right. Bye-bye.